Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of It Ain't Weak to Speak. My name is Sam Webb, and this show is dedicated to ending the stigma around mental health through community, connection, and the hard-hitting truth. I'll be speaking with guests from all over the world about life to inspire and to educate people to speak up so that we can save more lives. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Welcome, Sally Spencer-Thomas. Long time no speak, but gee, I'm excited to have you on the podcast today. How are you?
Oh, I'm just great. And I'm so excited to recross paths with you, Sam. It's been a while. It's been a minute, but I am so glad to come back and learn about all your great work.
And likewise, it's great to reconnect. It's like we haven't really lost too much time in between. I mean, you're still doing amazing work, if not more amazing work than when we last connected. And you've been on your own little self-exploration journey and finding your own niche and what you're working at. But before we dive into all that, can you tell and explain to our audiences where we crossed paths, how we met during the work that you're doing?
Yeah, it was, we got connected through Kevin and Margaret Hines at one of the many national and international conventions. They were sharing the great work that was happening out of Australia. A number of you really working hard to lift up the voices of lived experience. And I was like, that is where we need to be. That's where we need to head. So we've had a couple of dinners and a number of late night conversations with these crews that come together to kind of figure out how we can do this better. And so I actually can't remember the moment, but I remember I think we met up in Las Vegas and Portland and Australia and all over. And it's been such a joy to see so many so passionate about this topic.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great to connect with people from all over the world, really, because everyone's got so many different stories and you really feel invigorated, educated, inspired, and I guess empowered when you connect with people. I feel with people like yourself, especially who share such honesty and vulnerable stories from a very sacred place. And I mean, that probably begs me into my next question is why the space, Sally? What made you get into this? Where did it all start for you? Because your passion for this is unparalleled. And I really want to find out on a deeper level where that started for you.
Sure. Yeah. So I think I stumbled into psychology because I had really good professors in college at Bowdoin College, and I liked learning about people and their stories, and I liked understanding how people changed, and I just kept going. And also I just love learning. So I kept going and going, and I got my, doctorate degree in psychology. And then I went out into the real world and I went, oh no, I thought I wanted to be a therapist, but it turns out I have the wrong personality to be a therapist. I'm much more of a systems and cultural change, and some have called me an evangelist. I'm much better out and about than behind closed doors. So I shifted gears in the early 2000s to work at a university and do leadership development. And that I love. And actually, I think that's a lot of what you do with Livin' is you help people find kind of how their gifts and talents and passions fit into the needs of the world. And I love that. And that was a really great use of my psychology degree. And I was right in the beginning of getting that all figured out. And then I lost my brother to suicide in 2004. And it was devastating. He had battled bipolar condition pretty secretively. The family knew, and some of his closest friends from age 19 on. And he was amazingly successful. So nobody ever questioned that he had anything but joy and amazing talent that he ever suffered. But he did. And he did much of it alone because he didn't really have any peers that were in the same situation. And everybody just saw an amazingly successful person. Until the summer of 2004, again, if you're familiar with bipolar condition, there's swings in intensity all the time. And he went really, really high up in his mania in that summer. And he just absolutely derailed his life very quickly, left his family. He ruined his business. He spent all his money. I mean, kind of all the harm marks of really destructive bipolar condition. And we can trace it to the day that he met with his accountant, and his accountant said, dude, you're broke. It's over. And that news was really catastrophic to him because his identity as a successful and wealthy businessman was a big part of how he saw himself. So it was just a free fall from there on out, which was pretty much the last 2 weeks of his life. He came back to our family, and we wrapped him in all kinds of love and tried to encourage him to get to resources. But I think he just came back to say goodbye. And I remember the last time we were chatting, and he was asking me to tell him about this book that many of us had read called The Unquiet Mind. And I was like, look, there's lots of options here. You know, we can get through this. It's going to work out. We're going to be okay. There's hope. There's hope. There's hope. And he said to me, but Sally, it's madness. And 4 days later, he took his life.
Wow.
So that was, yeah, go ahead.
That must have really shook the family up, given the intensity. And I mean, that must have really derailed you guys. How did you manage that? And how do you manage that as someone who's trained in this field? Like, what was that conversation like when you got a chance to speak with your brother before he took his life? What was that like?
Yeah, I think he had already resigned in that space, that he was not going to try anymore. I think he was just kind of trying to placate all of us. And we did see it. We did know that he was in trouble, and did our best. So, but I know that, it wasn't long after. In fact, it was the night of his death that his very close friend from Atlanta called my brother's wife and said, "Oh my God, what do we do?" And she said, "No matter what you do, don't let him be forgotten." And so it was literally on that night that this man's wheels were turning. It was December 7th, 2004. And by January of 2005, Sean had convened all my brother's closest friends and our family to do something in our acute grief. And I know this is not an uncommon story after tragedy, including after a suicide tragedy, but that's where we found ourselves. And we decided in that moment that we were both going to honor the life that he lived, as well as prevent the terrible way that he died, by doing bold gap-filling work. We weren't going to replicate the work that other people had already done. We were going to find the biggest holes and try to figure out something that would fill that gap. And so here I am. I'm about 16 years in my mental health provider journey, if you count my undergraduate years. And no one has really told me, we talk a lot about it today, but this is back in 2005. No one had really told me that the majority of people who die by suicide were just like my brother. They were white men in the middle years. Unlike my brother, most of these men had also never sought any kind of mental health services, actually rarely showed up at any kind of healthcare services. So the whole idea of the message, if you're depressed, go seek help, was missing this whole group of people that were incredibly high risk for suicide. So that became
why was it missing? And what was actually missing? What are we talking about? What was missing?
Yeah, two things. So most of these guys, and we call them double jeopardy guys, held what we would call traditional norms of masculinity. The idea that they are the strong ones, they are the people that solve problems, they don't have problems, other people depend on them, they don't depend on other people. And the whole idea of mental health services is completely foreign and really counterintuitive. So when we started investigating this, and we did a number of years of research and development in this area, we were listening to these guys. And again, many of them were in traditional industries like construction or first responder communities or our military. And they would say things like, we pride ourselves on our own resilience and our ability to solve problems. When we experience distress and despair, it's usually because the world is overwhelming. There's too much going on in the world, whether it's our job, money, our relationship, our parenting. It's stuff coming at us that's the problem. It's not us that's the problem. Mm-hmm. So as a first entryway, you can't come in the door talking about mental health because it's not how we're seeing our problems. And then secondly, the idea of talking to someone about our emotions doesn't seem like it's going to solve my problem at work. Right. So yeah. So it's, and I have to take off time from work, and I got to drive across town, and somebody's going to see my car in front of the clinic. Like, it's too far from what I think is going to help me. So if you're saying that is what's going on here, and that is what I need, you've got to do a much better job connecting the dots for me. So that's kind of where we started. And it kind of veered off into two paths that are continuing today. One of them is to try to figure out what is the avenue to reach these men, and how do we start moving them along in thinking more proactively about mental health. Because a lot of these guys, there's just one attempt and it's fatal, so you can't wait for them to
don't get a
survive.
second chance.
You don't get a second chance. So so we got to back it up and see where things start to unravel for them and meet them where they're at. Not like say you have to be over here, but we see your pain over here. And here's a whole bunch of other guys that have had similar pain. So it's not that was the other thing they told us, like, yeah, you mental health professionals with all your degrees, the way you talk about this stuff does not resonate at all.
So it's sort of like
dry.
It's sort of like missing the mark. It's not quite
totally
relatable and stuff like that. And I'm sure. Okay, so hold on that, because I find that very intriguing. So, as far as the work and the research and filling this gap, so to speak, that you're looking at doing and which you are doing, there's no doubt about it. And we'll talk about that more in depth in a minute. But there's obviously a lot of data and a lot of facts and science that is enforced here. What have you found that's most common, and why? I know you've answered why the gap exists and what males sort of identify with the fact of, trying to problem solve themselves, and I can handle it. And we're going to try and come at them from a different perspective or a different angle. What is that angle?
Yeah. So that's the exciting part, because that's what we asked them too. I'm like, okay, we get why we're missing the mark. How do we fix this, right? How do we fix this, right? That's a word that, yes, fix it. I can fix things. So they told us a bunch of stuff. They said, number one, we're much more likely to listen to a peer, another guy very similar to us, but maybe like one step above on this perceived power hierarchy we have in our minds, a guy we have vicarious credibility for, like that guy I respect. If that guy says something like, I went through a thing and I reached out to this resource and I'm a better man or a father or a partner or a leader or whatever because of it, I'm listening to that guy way before I'm listening to a clinician or a researcher.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah. And then again, if the peer can then connect the dots to a well-vetted, trusted resource,
like a mental health professional.
Right. But they have to get the warm handoff from someone they trust.
Correct.
So that was
you're saying having that trust as as a gatekeeper to then on passing them on to someone who might be also a trusted mental health clinician or a professional, a lot higher chance of that person going down the journey of seeking professional help, rather than just going, why don't you go see a mental health professional, or here, I'll take you to a psychologist, sort of thing. Is that what you're trying to say?
That's exactly what I'm trying to say. Right. And also, the more that mental health resource, again, it could be a social worker, psychologist, the more that resource has a specialty area that addresses their need, the more likely that trust is going to happen. So again, we're seeing this with military and veterans, all kinds of mental health professionals getting specialty niches in being able to serve those communities, or first responders. Because again, sometimes we got one chance. We got one chance for them to feel like they're understood and that they have hope that whatever they're going to invest here, whether it's their money or their time, is going to get a return on investment. They're going to feel better, and they're going to be better. They're going to be better performers. They're going to be better husbands. They're going to be better fathers, whatever it is that's important to them. They want to know, if I spend my money and time doing this, I better have a good outcome. Right. So that was a really important insight, that peers are that gap that was missing. Another important insight, which we really wouldn't have anticipated, we said, okay, we could probably figure out the peer thing. How do we actually reach you? Because you're not showing up in the mental health world. You're not really even showing up in healthcare. How do we get to you? And they're like, oh yeah, that's easy. And we're like, yeah, tell us, what is it? And they're like, oh yeah, you make it funny. If you make it funny, our kind of funny, we'll pay attention. And if it's really good funny, we'll actually even pass it along to other guys. And we went, are you freaking kidding me? Funny? Wow. You're going to try to make suicide funny. And they're like, well, I don't know. Sure. Why not? That's your problem to figure out. Once you get that figured out, you come back to us and test it out with us, and we'll tell you if you hit the mark. So luckily for us, we were partnering with a full service advertising agency called Cactus, and the Department of Public Health and Environment in Colorado. But the advertising agency knew funny. They knew how to make the messages really engaging and edgy and funny, right on the line, right on the line, so people would be like, whoa, what is that? And so we started testing out some concepts. And now this is a really important thing to understand. Sometimes my idea of funny is not your idea of funny,
Yeah,
Sam.
they're very different. Yeah, totally.
That's right. That's right. So we would kind of, they would have their creative geniuses cook up all these messages, and then we would put them in front of the firefighters or the construction workers or the military, and they would go like, that one's great. That's stupid. This one makes no sense at all, right? And then we would start to craft these messages. So that was another really key thing, that humor made a difference. Okay, so humor cut through the clutter. Yeah. It got people's attention. It was unexpected in this space, and it had to be done very carefully, obviously. Yeah,
because a lot of people are very cautious whether I'm saying or doing the right or wrong thing, and they're worried. That's why they're always constantly treading on eggshells, because it's like, oh, I don't want to do the wrong thing.
But here's what we know about laughter. All right, when we laugh, our brain pours out all of these chemicals that puts us at ease. This is why we love to laugh. This is why laughter is so important, is that we just start to relax into a situation. And when we evaluated our program, this is the Man Therapy program that we launched in 2012. When we started to do the evaluation, that's what the folks told us, the end users, these guys that we were trying to reach. They're like, I know, I'm so tired of going to these dry clinical mental health websites with endless lists of warning signs and risk factors and endless links of things that are supposed to help me.
There's just no relatability there. It's like it's done. They're not speaking their language, so they're not believing what they're trying to read, or who's told them to go to certain sites if they don't believe what they're reading, and it doesn't hit the mark,
That's right. And they don't see themselves in any of it. So the humor helped with that quite a bit. And they said, I got into a place where I could receive the information because the humor helped me relax into it. So that was really cool. And then they also said, if you could just please give us an opportunity to see if we could fix things ourselves before you send us to this very scary thing that doesn't make any sense to us, these professional mental health providers. And so we created a way for them to do that. And so the main experience, so when people go to mantherapy.org, is that right away, they are encouraged to take a 20-point head inspection, which was developed with lots of science behind it. It takes very standardized questions on depression, anxiety, anger, substance use, and it tweaks them a bit to put them in the voice, in the brand of this Man Therapy experience. So they're a little funny while also being serious, and so they can answer those questions in the privacy of their own phone, in their own computer, wherever they are, and very quickly get not only results back on how they scored, should I be worried about myself or not, but also content starts to pop up like Pinterest based on their responses. So for example, if they came up high on substance use and anger, and also they indicated they're a cop, boom, all of these resources come up. Some of them are self-help. Here's 12, a couple of things you can do today to manage your anger. Some of them are peer resources. Some of them are professional resources that we vetted, and some of them are crisis resources, especially if they indicate anything related to, yes, I'm thinking about suicide, or they come up high across all the scales. We're going to direct them very quickly to crisis resources.
What do you mean in regards to being vetted? Why?
So
just because is that to suit and to match your type of audience, the type of brand you're trying to go for here, and the people that you're trying to attract? Am I correct saying that?
That is right. Okay. So when we started to do this, everybody and their sister, started coming out like, oh, I work with men. I'm like, no, we're not going to post individual providers on this website. That's not what it's for. But we're going to help give these guys a shortcut to places where we have greater confidence that they're going to find that their needs are met. So for example, on the crisis resources, we wanted to make sure we had the veterans crisis line up there, right? So that they can reach someone who has understood their experience in military service. We also have a a large group of mental health providers who have indicated and have credentials that say they specialize in men's mental health, and they also specialize in suicide prevention and intervention. And they have
Wow.
to document that they have taken certain types of training or have earned certain types of credentials in those spaces.
So
So that's
what?
cool.
Yeah, it sounds unreal. So that's mantherapy.org. And we'll show all
Yeah,
that in the show notes,
mantherapy.org.
and we'll have all that in the show notes, guys, too, so you can click and go directly there if you want to check it out. But I want to pull you back up in regards to the humor, because I find it as a very, I'd get it if I'd seen a little bit of humor around suicide, mental health, and whatnot. I'd be open minded to it, but not everyone is. Everyone's very different. So where do you draw the line, and do you have an example of something
Sure.
that could be seen as okay to use versus something that's probably taking it too far?
Right.
Because
So,
I don't want listeners to think, okay, now we can make a big, massive joke out of it. And
oh,
it's,
we can,
yeah,
right.
I
So,
want to sort of draw the line
right.
so that it's not blurred for people.
Yeah. So the humor is not around mental health. The
Yep.
humor is around traditional norms of masculinity and how they don't work in the space of mental health. It's a very important distinction. So one of our most popular taglines is, you can't fix your mental health with duct tape, right? So a lot of guys who are fixers, they're using their duct tape everywhere to like fix a pipe or
and that
pull a
resonates with
table
them.
together. Right. Yeah, exactly. For our first responders, I think one of their favorite ones was, sometimes it sucks saving lives, to acknowledge that their work is really challenging and sometimes not very rewarded, and it kind of sucks. Or for our military and veterans, the one that they love the best was, sometimes when you're in the shit, it turns to shit and it's shit, or something like that. Like, they're irreverent, but it's in the language that they speak. It's not, do you have clinical depression?
True.
Right?
It's directly speaking their language in terms of what
Right.
field or profession they're in.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
right.
And
Okay, that's fair.
and again, we're making fun of the traditional norms of masculinity. That, sometimes, while it does make you super resilient in all of these other places, when you're dealing with overwhelming life experiences like trauma and addiction, your white knuckling just makes it worse. And that's what the humor is kind of driving at. Like, yes, it's so important that you're tough, but in this space, it's not going to work for you. And that's what the humor is trying to get them to realize.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting how you've sort of looked at that perspective. And I think it's certainly something that would resonate with a lot of blokes and people that are probably listening into this podcast right now, So guys,
or connected to someone, maybe
yeah,
it's your,
or connected
brother,
to someone.
an uncle, or a father. Yeah.
So guys, check out mantherapy.org. But where do you draw the line with, like in the work that you've done over the last 16 years, and, you've worked in a number of different roles, advocacy roles, leadership roles, you've spoke at the White House, you've done a TED Talk. Unfortunately, we can't, actually, I should rewind that. From your, we're trying to help people, right? Seek the right help for them so that they can get back on track and live a healthy, happy, fulfilling life. What would you say to someone right now who is struggling, that has tried a number of different avenues to try and seek the right help for them, and it hasn't worked? Or it might be a partner who's been working so hard on their husband or their brother or whatever it is. What's some advice or some tips that you could give to them based on some of the research and all the work that you've done over the years?
Yeah, I feel that, because it's hard to stay persistent when you're in so much pain, whether you are the support person or the person living with the despair. And here's what I also know to be true. Like, there are a lot of people who are just at the point of giving up, and then they turn a corner, and there is a relationship they never thought there would be in their lives, or there's an opportunity that they never thought would be there for them. And so sometimes it's not the right, maybe you don't have the right match of your mental health support. Maybe you have got the wrong counselor, or you haven't had the right medication or whatever. Sometimes it's maybe that you haven't found your community yet. I've been involved in some recovery communities, and I can tell you, when you find people who have had similar struggles with you, it just, okay, here we are together. We're a community. We're all imperfect, but we're going to take turns here on who's having the really bad day. And then everybody's going to come around that person and lift them up and make sure that they've got their emotional needs met, and maybe some other needs too. Like, can I take care of your kids for the weekend, or walk your dog, or how can I support you? So finding that right peer community is really important. Finding a place where you feel connected and that you matter. I think if we look at Thomas Joiner's research again and again and again, what compounds the pain, whatever that is, whether it's depression, anxiety, substance use, whatever, trauma, what compounds that pain is a profound experience of being alone. And so however we can find our people, our little communities or big communities, sustain us through our hard times. So again, sometimes that's a peer group that has a similar struggle to me. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's a faith community. Sometimes it's a work community. It's a group of people that helps bring out the best in you. So that's one thing, is just to kind of explore a little bit. What do you love about the world? What calls you? And then see if you can find a community that you can be a part of. The other piece is to see if there's a pathway into making meaning out of your struggle. Now, if you're in the throes of crisis, it's not the best time to do that, probably. But again and again, we hear the stories of when people turn around, it's often because they find a calling. And it may or may not be directly connected to their struggle, but it's something that gives them purpose and a sense of meaning. Go ahead.
And it gives people something bigger than themselves to concentrate on and to focus on. So they're sort of releasing themselves of the burden or the pressure within themselves, because they're focusing on something more meaningful, more fulfilling, to help drive their life forward. Because if that happens, they almost feel indirectly feeling like themselves are getting better. Does that make sense?
That's totally right on.
Yeah.
So when it comes to like making meaning out of your own pain, that storytelling stuff that both you and I really advocate for is huge. And again, whether you tell your story just to yourself or just to your friends and family, or whether you get up and do it like we're doing more publicly or in front of legislators, that ability to create that narrative for yourself where you own your own hero's journey is a really important part of that meaning making. And it's super important, going back to the men again, for guys to do it, and for men to hear each other's stories. We just launched a book last week, Guts, Grit, and the Grind, which I'm hoping you contribute to soon. It's a series. It's a men's anthology, a series of storytelling of different men from all parts of the globe, from all different backgrounds, all different types of despair and distress journeys, and all different types of recovery journeys. And it's just been like one of the most beautiful projects I've ever gotten to be involved in, to see all of these men like stand so strong and proud about what they have been able to come through, and then also feeling so intentional about how their journey can then help clear a path for another guy who was where they were before, feeling alone and isolated and despairing. And I love to be a witness to that. I think it's a miraculous thing to see.
Yeah, I bet. And on that, I'm sure you've heard some amazing stories in your life so far with the work that you've done. What's been some of the best moments of your life so far through the work that you've done?
Oh,
anything that stands out in particular?
Yeah. So we've done a number of panels at professional conferences. Okay, so think about these conferences, right? All of these PhDs sharing their really important research, very highbrow, very, 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 everybody's very, very important, all of this stuff. And we brought our, lived experience panel of men. And, there's not a dry eye in the room. There's a firefighter up there talking incredibly powerfully, emotion right there. about what it felt like to lose his captain and how that impacted his own mental health, and how he's now turned that around to be a leader in firefighter suicide prevention across the nation. We heard another story of a man who's really well known in the suicide prevention field as being an amazing advocate, who then later in his career came out and said, "Oh, and I'm also a suicide attempt survivor. I just didn't tell you that before. Of course, that's what gives me the insight and the passion to do this work. And I'm not afraid to say it out loud." Number of those people that had already established their creds, in the field as being experts are like, "Yeah, of course, me too. Why do you think I do this work? It's clearly not for the money,"
Yeah,
that
true.
kind of thing. Military guys. One of my friends from grammar school, honestly, Brendan Fitzgerald and I rode the bus together back in the day, and he ended up doing several tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. Now we're in our 50s. He's had head trauma, massive post-traumatic stress, and he is such a warrior. And he credits his turnaround, the fact that he is still on this planet, to his animal assistance dog, Russell. And so his story is like this, I get chills just thinking about it, this beautiful moment where he gets to meet the dog, and he's in the airport and the dog has to choose him, right? So he's standing there going, "Oh my God, if this dog doesn't choose me, I don't know if I'm going to make it." And the dog just comes right over and is instantly bonded, and really has saved his life over the last decade. So it's stories like that are so incredible for these men to share. And then they find each other and across all of the world, and they connect. So we just did a United Suicide Survivors International panel with Greg Van Borsum and Joe Williams, so a couple of mates from over there, with a couple of our guys, and now they know each other, right? And so they'll do other projects together moving forward.
Yeah, it's so great. It's so great how it really does open up something far greater than the day itself in terms of connection, real human connection, and it can really set you on a new path where you can find a higher calling, and and it could be right around the corner. So if anyone's listening right now that's struggling, whether it is with a mental health challenge or a mental illness, or whether you're just struggling after something, traumatic has happened in your life, or whether it's something that is really big in your own eyes, know that, with the right help and the right support, there is a lot of growth out there for you. And you've heard it straight away from, Sally Spencer Thomas that, she's living proof. She's been in this field for quite some time. She's like the sound of passion coming out of your voice. She'll be in it for a fair few years to come too. So I'm excited to see what's to come. Talk to me through the workplace stuff. I'm interested in the workplace mental health and suicide prevention, because a lot of organizations are, what I feel, and I'm going to be blatantly honest, and I'm going to speak it from the heart right now, are very reactive in this space. They've always been reactive rather than being proactive around mental health and the discussions within the workplace. For example, a workplace may have lost an employee or a staff member to suicide. Now let's get in the guys to come and do a talk around mental health, and let's do these mental health days. But it was never something that was ingrained into their workplace before that. What's your thoughts? What's your thoughts on mental health or workplace and the mental, what I should say is, what are your thoughts on mental health education and well-being and suicide prevention within the workplace? And why are organizations not doing it?
Very good. All right. Well, I just wanted to tie up one last thing on the last conversation, because I forgot to mention the title of the book, which is Guts, Grit, and the Grind, which also came from our guys. They said, we pride ourselves, and it also gets in our way, our risk-taking, our perseverance, and our ability to fix things. That's how we see ourselves as strong, and it's also getting in our way. So Guts, Grit, and the Grind.com. Come join our community. All right.
We'll throw that in the show notes also. The book, those titles and the pages, the artwork that's gone into them are amazing. Sally, you should be very proud.
I'm looking forward
to hopefully being a part of the third book. Fingers crossed.
Yes.
Thank you for the opportunity, sir.
Definitely. So let's talk about workplace. So going back again to the aftermath of Carson's death, realizing that the majority of people who die by suicide have never stepped foot in a mental health space or in healthcare in general, we're not going to get them over there. But most of the men who died by suicide were working, or they were just working, or they have an immediate family member that's working. So logically, it makes sense that the workplace is the most cross-cutting system we have, more so than healthcare, more so than education, more so than faith. It's work. Most working age adults are working. So while that's all logical, that doesn't mean it's easy. So we started a workplace suicide prevention training and program back in 2007 called Working Minds. And, we worked really hard on it. It was, based on the best evidence that we had back in the day. And we launched it and we're like, ta-da, suicide prevention in the workplace. We're going to save so many lives and prevent so much suffering, and it's going to be awesome. And people are like, what? Suicide prevention in the workplace? No, that's a medical issue. People need to take that stuff up with their doctors. And we were like, but they're not. And they're here. So maybe you could do something to help. Well, it didn't really take off right away. We had some slow grow in the beginning, but it was very slow. We didn't really have good data to show that it was impacting workplaces. We didn't have stories like we have today. And then that started to change. About 2010 to 2014, we had a couple of really bold leaders who stepped into the arena. The military, clearly by that point in time in the United States, it was a major story that our service members were having increased rates of suicide. So they were working really hard to try to figure things out. Then the first responder community, both firefighter and law enforcement at the top levels of their international associations, started to say we can no longer deny that suicide rates are at par or even greater than line of duty death for these men and women that are out there trying to protect us. And then a couple of really bold leaders in the construction space said, I don't want this on my watch. Everything you tell me about who's at risk for suicide describes the people that work with us. We can't wait, right? And so we had all these early adopters who started to move things forward. And often they had a loss or had a struggle themselves. And they started creating programs like Mates in Construction, which is, of course, the gold standard for everybody around the world about what can be done through workplace initiatives. And then in the United States, we started getting data, which was the game changer. We started getting data from our Centers of Disease Control and Prevention that said, these industries have high rates of suicide, and we could benchmark. Here's the general population. Here's construction. Here's mining and extraction. Here's our agriculture, farming, and fishing. Like, here's transportation and manufacturing, all these male-dominated industries. And people went, oh my God, like, we didn't really know this. We kind of knew it, but now we have data. So because the early adopters now had stories, and because we now had data, and now we have COVID and social unrest, and we have all these other stressors. Like, it is one of the top stories of the day is that workplaces are experiencing unprecedented levels of distress, despair about economic conditions, about racial injustice, about the future of our world. Like, it's showing up at work in a big way. So luckily, there's been several of us that have been prepared for this moment. We have, 15 plus odd years of program and training and curriculum and guidelines. So luckily also for us for this moment, last October, United Suicide Survivors International, along with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention and the American Association of Suicidology, together, this three-legged stool partnership, launched our nation's first set of workplace guidelines for suicide prevention. And so now we have a document.
Weren't you?
Yeah, I was amongst many other brilliant people, Dr. Jody Jacobson Fry and Maggie Mortali, and we have a whole committee of about 20 people that did focus groups hitting, hundreds of people. Like, this was a labor of love for many years.
But how important?
And to have launched it,
very, very important. So is this like when you go into a workplace, for example, in Australia, they got a workplace health and safety guidelines around that. So what you're saying is you guys have created its first mental health and suicide prevention guidelines in the workplace. Is that correct?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, wow,
And
that's
to
awesome.
give credit where credit is due,
Yeah.
Suicide Prevention Australia had a position statement on workplace suicide prevention that they published, I'm going to say back in maybe 2016-ish in that area. And then also Canada has a set of psychological safety standards that comes through their government. And we were looking at those models to say, okay, those are great. What would work here in the United States? And so we took some of that and adapted it and tested it out with people and landed where we landed. And it's very exciting because
So what does it
now,
mean? Yeah, what does it mean? What's it mean for
yeah,
workplaces?
yeah. So rather than, a 200-page PDF that's going to be outdated in
Hmm.
a year and a half, that's not what we did. We created an interactive portal where people can go in and kind of get to understand their own community. So the first step is take a look at yourself, whatever you are, a professional organization, a union, a workplace. Do some self-assessment on where you're strong, what your strengths around bolstering mental resilience and mental health, and where are your areas of needing change. And one of the ways that we are intentionally different than many of the traditional workplace mental health programs is that we say, yes, it's important to get a clear pathway for people who are suffering to the supports that they can help them, but it's not enough. It is not enough just to get the troubled people to help. Sometimes you also have to figure out, how are we, this workplace,
Help.
contributing
Mm.
to people's despair, and own it and fix it.
That's a cultural thing normally though, isn't it?
Yes, it absolutely
So
is
then
related to
how do you,
culture.
and then how, okay, because at the end of the day, a lot of people look for quick fixes, right? And we can't deny that.
Mhm.
A lot of people, especially males, they want to learn quick fixes. How can I fix things? There's not a lot of
The
patience.
three steps too,
Yeah,
right?
correct. And so workplaces, right, are probably looking for quick fixes as well. And unfortunately,
Yeah.
there is no such thing as a quick fix, because to change a culture within a company that's been ingrained for years, some are 50 plus years, depending on the organization, where do you start with that? That's a whole project in itself. Then you throw on what the organization has to do day in and day out to survive. Then you have to do everything else in regards to making sure that the company is making a profit so that they're alive still. You know what I mean? So there's a lot at play here, and it's not
Hmm.
as easy as it sounds.
No, there's a lot to this, but it's not a quick fix, and it is manageable.
Yeah.
So, especially in this time of heightened, prolonged crisis, we have an opportunity here to shift culture like never before. What we know about brains in crisis is that things map fast because
Mm.
we have to adapt really quickly. So, knowing that there are broken pieces of your culture, this is the time to fix it. And we also know that brains in crisis under toxic stress, we can't deal with a whole lot of information. I don't know if you remember back. I remember when this first hit, when Italy shut down and everything locked down like on a dime.
Mm.
I lost like a week and a half. I don't even know where it went. Like, poof, my brain wasn't working whatsoever. So we know that we've got to do what we call small drips of change over time. Small drips, small pieces of information, small changes is one way to get there, because the brains, we just can't take in massive
Because
things
you get a
right
bit too
now.
it'd be too overwhelming, and it
Oh,
would add to the
so
stress. And
easily
yeah,
overwhelming.
absolutely,
Yeah, yeah.
absolutely.
So one of the things that we've been doing just in this COVID space is that we've been doing what we call coping cards with pulse check surveys, and we've been doing this with small military union units as well as massive global companies, and the process works the same. So about every 6 to 8 weeks or so, we give out a little survey to the people, and we just basically say, how's it going out there? Are things better than they were before? Are things worse? What's helping? What's hurting? What do you need? And that's it. It takes 5 minutes. We get all kinds of really important data back about who's struggling and why. And then we craft in response to that. So it's very nimble,
Mhm.
these little tips. Here's a hack to help you regulate
Yep.
anxiety, or here's something you could do to help your kiddos,
Just
or
really,
whatever.
really simple
Super
stuff.
short.
Yep.
Within a minute, they've got a tip. And
Yep.
people have been very receptive to that. And workplaces have used it because it shows very quickly that how they're responsive to not only their employees, but their employees' families' well-being. Win, 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 everybody wins. So that's an example. But going back to the suicide prevention guidelines, we try to make it a light as lift as possible to get people enrolled in the concept. Because if you say like, yes, we're going to change your culture, and then it's going to be this big expensive thing, like people are like, no, I just don't have the bandwidth.
It's just too
but
much.
If
It's overwhelming in itself.
Yeah. So we've boiled down, like, here's the vision of where we could go. Here's one thing you can do today. And we also realized we got to recognize and reward the early adopters, the people who are like, yes, this is important. How do I figure out? And then their competitors like, what are they doing over there? Right. So we've created a badge process that after a certain number of defined action steps, they get a little badge. I'm a bronze level pledge partner in the workplace suicide prevention, and they can put that, in their signature line or on their website. And people are like, what the heck is that? Well, we're taking action steps to save lives. What are you doing? It's kind of like when the awesome. NBA stopped playing to talk about Black Lives Matter, and all the other professional sports teams were like, golly, we probably should do something. Yes, you should. Right. Yeah. When you model it, then other people start to step into the space.
They do. And then it becomes a movement in itself. And that's how you eradicate change. So, you're doing awesome things. You've got your hands full. It sounds like you're very, very, very busy. And I'm very grateful for your time, as I'm always grateful for everyone's time, as are, I'm sure, our listeners. I want to ask, though, we talk about workplace mental health, and I know that's your niche right now. That's where you're spending most of your time. Professionally, as well as other areas, passion and everything else. But what are your thoughts, just quickly, for everyone who's listening, from a mental health, I guess, arena for students and for young people? Have you done much work around that? And do you think a similar program or programs similar to what you're already embarking on could be something that could be suitable for young people going through school?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I started my career at a university, and I miss so much working with the 19 to 22-year-old community, because they're brilliant and they're inspired and they've got big ideas and lots of energy, and they're trying to find their place in the world. And it's just a really exciting time. So from where I sit now, working with a lot of companies, people in the middle years mostly, I would say that the upcoming generation in many ways is way beyond. They're so far out in front of this. They've been talking about social emotional wellness since kindergarten. And they have a language for it, and they have a comfort for it. And at the same time, they have a whole unique set of stressors. As controversial as 13 Reasons Why was when it came out, and kind of the outcome that it had, it also really opened the door for parents in particular to say, come to think of it, I never had to deal with sexting when I was 17 years old. I didn't have cyberbullying as a stressor in my life. I wonder what that would have been like at that time, right? So we were made aware of all kinds of different types of stressors that we didn't go through, and how maybe we could get some empathy and compassion for what that's doing to younger adults' mental health. And I don't know that we'll ever totally understand, because it's a whole, generational experience. But I also know that while those things are stressors, they're also amazing tools. And that is what, young adults are trying to move forward, is how can we leverage the power of social media and all of these technology tools for good, just like you're doing with this podcast, right? And they're very adept. They figure stuff out so quickly, and they're mentoring, their parents and the older adults, like, you're kind of getting it wrong. Here's how you actually do the thing. And that's very humbling and super important. My kids school me every day, like, Mom, stop it. Stop the thing you're doing on Facebook. Stop. I'm like, oh man.
Yeah, it is true. And it is forever changing. But I feel the difference between young people, especially in school, versus younger adults. I feel young people they're very open to learning new ways if they're effective, but you've also got to come from an angle and speak their language, similar to what you mentioned earlier from a workplace. And like, if you're a first responder, you don't want to just give them an A4 piece of paper that says, go to a psychologist. You know what I mean? So you've
Yeah.
got to speak their language. You've got to be relatable. And I think there's been a lot of great work happening in that space. And I still believe there's a lot of more great work that can be happening. Similar in workplaces. Not every workplace is adopting mental health guidelines. That's for sure. I know that for a fact. So, I mean, it's amazing seeing the journey that you're on and the impact that you're making here in the States. And no doubt, we'll start seeing more and more of these changes, all over the world. And I guess one of my
I have one more
last...
thing to say about young adults, actually,
Yeah.
because I have such hope and high expectations of how they're going to get this right. I think the other place that they're getting it right, more so than the older adults, is that young adults really understand the social determinants of mental unwellness and distress and suicidal despair. They understand things about like economic inequality, racial injustice, LGBTQ challenge, and how those all fit in to our overall community well-being, right? And we could send people to counselors all day, but if we don't get that social determinant stuff right, we're never going to get in front of this. And that's what I hear them being loud about, is like, stop with everybody needs to get on antidepressants. How about we stop treating each other like crap? How about we do that, and that stuff is super inspiring.
Yeah, it is. But then a lot of the conversation, I know, for example, today we've spoken a lot about, someone who may be struggling with a mental illness, for example, what strategies and approaches you can have on that person or people so that they seek the right help that is correct for them. And it's going to vary from person to person. No one's the same. You and I both know that. But what about the people that aren't suffering with a mental illness, but are having a really bad time? Trauma is in their life. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to go and be suicidal tomorrow, but they're still at risk. So are we attacking them with the same sort of programs? Are we attacking them with the same sort of language and conversations, or is that a whole different ballgame in itself?
Yeah, no, I think you've nailed it. That everybody has their own pathway. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but a lot of the conversations that we're always having, right, and something that I hear all the time because I'm in this space, and I'm sure you do too, is X amount of people per annum. We look at the doom and gloom. How many people struggle with mental illness? How many people reach out and get help? Who aren't reaching out and getting help? What's those percentages? How many people are taking their life? How many are attempting? We always look at those doom and gloom. But what about the people who aren't suffering with a mental illness but still sit on the mental health continuum, because we all do, and we're all either happy and then some people are mentally unwell or struggling or they're dipping or whatever word you want to put around that. And then people are thriving, surviving, living, whatever you want to say on that end. How do you help those people as well so that they can be included in this one conversation, so that this is all inclusive and it's not just focusing on the people or peoples that are suffering with a mental illness?
Yeah, so you're right. Well, we will, all of us will kind of, you can't go through this life without walking in the river of an overwhelming life experience or an
100%.
overwhelming time. And I remember, like my brother's death was a catastrophic experience in my life, but I had a pretty expected, prolonged and traumatic, but course of grief that fit that experience. Right. So it was kind of like, yes, this was an upending event. It took me a long time to get back on my feet, but it was all as expected. Later in life, in 2012, I would have what I called my first, and knock on wood, hopefully only, episode of major depression. And it was qualitatively different because it was nothing like I had ever experienced before. All my abilities to cope were out the window. And I just circled down a toilet, that's it. I stopped eating, stopped sleeping. Everything fell apart. I couldn't think clearly. And for me, my pathway through was my community. My suicide prevention community in particular stood by me and said, you know what, Sally, we love you no matter what. Doesn't matter if you lead this organization or if you're on this board. We don't care. We love you. They telling me that over and over again. And then I got on a little medication just so I could sleep again. And that re-regulated me and I was able to pull through to the next phase. Right. So I think if you come to this assumption that, like you said, we are all in this, and at some point or another, we're all going to be brought to our knees.
Absolutely.
And to be like mentally prepared for that moment, and to know like when it happens, there's a way through it. And there's there's a buffet that everybody has. Sometimes it's hidden, but it's all there. And some people will resonate with the crisis services that are anonymous. And some people will find a beloved counselor. Some people will need to go into inpatient treatment to get sober or whatever it is. Some people will find a peer group, like a recovery group that just nails it for them. Some people are going to find all kinds of self-help tips like yoga and meditation, and that's what works for them. But to make the assumption, we're all going to take our turn here. Like everybody gets a chance. And actually, as hard as it is to go through things like that, almost always you learn tremendous amounts about yourself, about the world, about your strengths, about who you can trust, about what, all spiritual awakenings, all kinds of things happen in that space of our darkest despair. And I remember when I was in that depression, kind of at the bottom, I remember thinking like, someday I'm going to have to write about this, of what it feels like to be a psychologist and a suicide loss survivor in this dark place. I can't do it today, but I'll probably write about it in the future. And just that thought alone, like someday I'm going to make meaning out of this and help the other psychologists who find themselves in a dark hole. Or help the other.
I think you are, or I think you are already making that indirectly. If you don't know, I think you are. But it's certainly something that I'd love to chat with you about in the future. About that conversation. We could talk all day, Sally. You're a wealth of understanding, wealth of knowledge, wealth of expertise. I'm so grateful that you've been on this podcast. And I'm so lucky that I've been able to reconnect with you and get your time today for sure.
Yes, and I can't wait to return the favor. So we're going to get that on the calendar soon.
That's
too.
all
You're
good.
Come on over and be on my podcast.
No one owes me anything, but you'll be hearing from me, Sally. On behalf of myself and the entire Living community, I want to say thank you. Thank you for sharing with us your journey, where it all started. Your passion is unparalleled. That is clearly evident, and we can all hear that. I can see it. For those of you who aren't seeing it, you're not obviously on the YouTube channel, but I can see it. The way you talk, the way you hold yourself, I love it. You've given me a newfound energy for the afternoon ahead. So, Sally, look after yourself. Take care. Much love, and thank you again for all of your help.
Thank you so much, Sam. Take care. Bye-bye.